Very good. There we are. Oh, look at that, both of us. So, hey, welcome everybody to God TV's Facebook page. I'm Ron Cantor. I'm the president of Shalanu TV, Israel's 24/7 Hebrew-speaking outreach to the Jewish people. Make sure to check out shalanu.tv. You won't understand anything because it's in Hebrew, but today, I am with New York Times bestselling author, also an Israeli. We're both Native Americans, but we made Aliyah, which means moving to Israel. I'm with Joe Rosenberg. Not only are you the best-selling author of many novels, but you are now the editor-in-chief of allisrael.com, which is, well, tell us what that is.
Sure. Great to be with you, Ron, and Shabbat Shalom. We should probably start that way. And Pesach
Right.
Sameach. We've got Passover is coming up, and hopefully the plague of Israeli elections will pass over us. But I'm not convinced. We'll see. We'll see what politicians have painted on their doors. But anyway, we'll get to all that in a moment. Yeah, All Israel News, which, as you say, is at allisrael.com, is a new website that we launched on September 1st of last year. We have a sister site, All Arab News. Also, people can find that at allarab.com. They're cross-linked. I mean, you could think of them as two different websites, but we don't. We think of them as like two pages or two sections of the newspaper. The reason we created both was this. There's so much media bias against Israel. Some of it is soft bias, meaning there are stories that just are badly covered, or things that we as evangelicals or Jewish believers in Jesus around the world would find interesting. The media doesn't cover. It's not like in some cases they're not trying to be hostile. They just don't see it. They don't get it. There are stories that just don't resonate with the secular editors that,
it's second and third hand bias. Like, they don't even realize they're being biased. They don't realize that they have been infected with fake news. They think they're reporting the true news sometimes, but it's spreading a bias.
Yeah, it's true. And, and certainly in the United States, you have newsrooms filled with, 95% will say we vote Democrat. Again, there's not something wrong about that. It's the question is, they don't even, they're like, I don't even know somebody who voted Republican. And we're not a partisan site. I don't mean that. I just mean, and we'll get into how All Israel News tries to cover Israeli politics. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you've got the soft bias that bothers us all. Just stories like, how come they're not covering that? How come that speech isn't interesting? How come that conference isn't getting any attention? Or how come whatever? Then there's hard bias, where the editors, the reporters, they absolutely know what they're doing. They're coming against us, and they are opposing the values, the faith, the things that we care about, and it's clear, like they're just against. Then there's war. Then there's Al Jazeera. Then there's the Iranian media, the Turkish media, the Russian media. They are out to be totally opposed to almost everything that we believe. And in that spectrum, the question is, do you get mad? I certainly have many times over the years. And I want to get even. So as a believer, we decided, let's stop railing against this. Let's stop saying, oh, there's a media Goliath out in the valley and no one will challenge it.
Right.
Let's just go be David. Like, let's just create a site that does this. And so All Israel News provides exclusive interviews with major newsmakers, original coverage and reporting, original polling, exclusive polling, but also insightful analysis. All of it is from a biblical evangelical worldview. It doesn't mean that every story that we're going to do has some faith element. It's just that's our box. That's the world that we look at. And we say right on the masthead that we are tracking news that affects Israel and the Middle East for the world's 600 million evangelicals. And I would, by the way, include the Messianic community worldwide within, broadly defined, the evangelical movement. So that's sort of why we're doing what we're doing. And on the Arab news site, I've got a lot of relationships with Arab Christians, Arab Muslim leaders, and others. They're honestly just not ready to be interviewed, profiled, discussed on the All Israel News platform. So we created an All Arabs news site. Now, again, we're cross-linked. People from one side know what the other side is doing. We're not trying to divide it. But one other thing, Ron, I think, and I know you're tracking this site, so I appreciate that. we're also um, linking to the really good stories, interesting stories that are in the Israeli press, in the Arab media, if it's in English, and in other international media outlets, because we're not saying that every media outlet is biased or every reporter. There's some really good coverage going on out there, but most people feel like I don't have the time, I don't have the insights to know what's true, what isn't, what should I trust, and we're trying to create essentially a one-stop shopping venue, allisrael.com.
Very good. Well, I would encourage everyone to go there and to sign up for your newsletter. And speaking of unbiased, we want to take some time this morning. Well, this morning for me, it's afternoon for you. By the way, one thing you or we both didn't know is that the time changed in Israel last night. So I woke up this morning in a panic, but you were gracious, and we certainly appreciate
right, because
that.
this was supposed to be at a certain time that we'd carved out, and then it moved by an hour. But no, we're fine. I try to give man one word. I appreciate it.
But we want to talk about the Israeli elections. We had our fourth election in 2 years this week on Tuesday. And initially on election night, based on exit pollings, the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was claiming victory. It looked like he might squeak out with a 61-seat majority, which is not really victory, but in these times, over the past few years, that would be considered a big deal. And of course, that would only be if one of the right-wing parties, Yamina, agreed to join with him. That was not a given. So now it's a few days later, things actually have gotten worse. If you're Benjamin Netanyahu, he did not get 61 seats, even with Yamina. It looks like he got 59. I want to talk about, well, let's just start. What is your overview of the election results?
Wow. Well, I think the headline is that, and let me start by saying that the way we cover things here in terms of elections, we're a nonprofit site, so we're nonpartisan. Okay.
Right.
So, but the way I think politics should be covered by a news organization is, and since we're both originally from the United States and you're in the United States right now, let's just use an American football or baseball analogy. Let's use American NFL football. The guys in the booth at the Monday Night Football game, covering if somebody does a good block, a good tackle, a good sack, a good interception, a good reception, a good throw, they're praised. They're analyzed. If somebody does something stupid, it gets said. But you never have the sense, in let's say a Pittsburgh Steelers, New England Patriots game, that the guys in the booth hate the Steelers.
Right.
They're against the Steelers and everything that's said is as though the Steelers are cruel, evil, horrible people that shouldn't even be allowed to play or suit up in the NFL. But that's how politics is covered.
Right.
And too often. And so this bothers us. So I say that because, listen, full disclosure, I worked for Benjamin Netanyahu 20 years ago. Yes, only for a few months. Netanyahu had been the prime minister from 1996 to 1999. He lost his re-election bid to Ehud Barak, an IDF chief of staff. In 2000, the fall, I got hired by Netanyahu as he put together a comeback campaign team, both with American consultants and his Israeli team. And I was one of the Americans. I had not moved to Israel. I had not made Aliyah yet. Long story short, he did not come back for 9 more years.
Right.
Okay. I played no useful help in his election bid, and that was the last campaign I ever worked on. I moved on to other things, including writing books. But I occasionally did some other projects for him for a few years, and I interviewed him a number of times. But I have not seen him personally. I haven't met with him individually in 10 years. But I need people to know that. So, but I know Netanyahu at least more than most people, and I've been watching him closely for 20 years. I don't have a stake in this. I mean, everybody has biases, but I'm just trying to say what's his strength and what is his weakness. But the weakness right now is that Bibi Netanyahu should have won this thing in a landslide. I mean, look at the Netanyahu record. It's very impressive. 4 Arab-Israeli peace deals in the last 6 months, right? Or, the end of last year. Netanyahu persuaded President Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital
Right.
of Israel and to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Netanyahu persuaded Trump to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and so many other things just in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Then if you talk about, it was Netanyahu who ordered the Mossad, Israel's CIA, to sneak into Tehran and steal the entire nuclear weapons archive of the Iranian government right out from under their noses and ship several tons of documents out back to Israel. Like that alone, like if you add up these things, this is pretty impressive. But Netanyahu, 4 elections in a row, cannot get a majority.
So the things that you brought up,
headline is that Netanyahu should have a landslide. And one more thing is, when you look at the final tallies of the votes today, there are 97 seats, Ron, 97 out of 120 that are either right wing, far right wing, center right, or just centrist.
Right.
All the leaders of which have worked with Netanyahu in the past. 97. He only needs 61 of those. Can't seem to do it.
So that's the big question. The examples that you brought up are all true and good, but they're all international. I think as a statesman, as a diplomat, he has been amazing. He has, you listed the thing, just the Abraham Accords alone are amazing. That we actually, Israelis are now flocking to Dubai. They can't wait to get there. But yet at home, he is the most polarizing figure in Israel. And so the question is why? If he has 97 people that are natural in this next Knesset that are natural allies, that they could actually have a government of 97 seats, which would be the largest government ever. Why can't he just get over 61? Why will those other leaders of other parties not want to work with him?
Well, there's good Bibi and there's bad Bibi. And what the world sees, especially what America.
By the way, that's what Ben Shapiro used to say about President Trump. There's good Trump and bad Trump. And they are very similar in many ways. I used to joke and say that the only difference between Netanyahu and Trump is that Netanyahu speaks really good English.
Well, look, all right. So on that for a second, there are some similarities, certainly the polarization issues, and that Netanyahu has a very fierce and loyal base,
right?
But struggles to expand that base, and Trump certainly had the same issue. One of the key differences, though, Ron, we should, in fairness, again, to Netanyahu, is Trump was a novice, right? First term, trying to figure this out, never done government before. Bibi Netanyahu has been a leader on the political battlefield for 30 years.
Right.
The longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel, which is no small thing. And even when he wasn't the prime minister, he was the leader of the opposition. He was the foreign minister. He served in a lot of key roles. And by the way, when he won in 1996, his highest role had been being deputy UN ambassador. Like, that's quite a leap. He had never been a cabinet minister. He'd never written a bill. That was quite a leap.
Right.
So there are a lot of differences. But that being said, look, everybody in Israel recognizes that as a foreign policy and national security strategist, there really isn't anyone better on the scene than Benjamin Netanyahu. So if you're worried about the Iran threat, you're thinking we need to go with Bibi. If you're worried about Hezbollah, the Iranian terror proxy force in Lebanon, firing 150,000 missiles at us, in the next war, something I read, I've got a new political thriller all about. Then you want Netanyahu in the cockpit of the country, as it were. When you think about all these strategic relationships, that Netanyahu can pick up a phone and talk to any world leader, that he is a world statesman.
Okay.
We're a little country, but he's a big player, right? He can go see Putin or Biden or anybody in an instant. That's just who he is.
There's nobody that leads such a small country who has such a big footprint. In other words, you can mention Putin, Trump, or Biden and Netanyahu in the same sentence. The difference is that we're a tiny country, and yet his name, he has just as much name recognition as Vladimir Putin.
Yes, that's exactly. And he is, I mean, this is his strongest suit, is as a global statesman and as a champion of Israel. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, as Jack Black might say, about Israel. So at home, people do appreciate that, but Netanyahu has completely botched the handling of COVID this year. People are furious at him. Multiple not lockdowns, never shut down the airport, never at least created testing at the airports, let in the London mutation, the South African mutation. Right. Then they finally shut it down at the airport. They still barely have enough testing. Unemployment skyrocketed. 70,000 businesses went out of business, went bankrupt.
Wow.
And Bibi seemed more focused on annexing Judea and Samaria for a while, or trying to. So these things just made people mad. Now, add to that the fact that Netanyahu was under indictment, not just in one or two, but three separate corruption, bribery trials. Mm-hmm. Now, he's innocent until proven guilty. I believe that. I approach it that way, but that's still weighing on the system. And then, and we'll get into the personality issues in a moment. But now to counter that, while Netanyahu is widely perceived, I mean, by 2/3 of the country or more, as having done a bad job with COVID, which is the single biggest, domestic issue. That being said, in this last month, Netanyahu did an amazing job bringing in enough vaccines that close to 90% of Israelis have had at least one of our shots. More than half the country has had both, myself, my wife, and my sons included. And so the infection rates are going down, death rates are going down, serious caseload going down. The country's reopening just at the perfect moment. And I don't think it's conspiracy, Netanyahu held back until elections. No, he moved as hard and fast as he possibly could, knowing that if he didn't get that right, he had no shot. And so that's the policy side. We haven't gotten into how does Netanyahu's personality play a role with disaffecting so many of these 97 members of Knesset, but I'm trying to answer them one section at a time as you asked me.
Okay, so let's talk about that because one of the things that I think that Israelis are saying right now and around the world really concern would be and this would be a reason that, say, like a Yair Lapid, who is behind me, he's at the end of the screen there. Hi, Yair. He is the leader of the opposition, but he's not a left winger. As you know, there really is no left wing in Israel. They got 14 out of 120 seats. And even the Labor Party isn't as left wing as they used to be. The far left Meretz Party is socially and in every other way a left wing party. But Yair Lapid is a centrist, and he's the head of the opposition. He got 16, 17 seats.
17, yeah.
And what we saw and this is another similarity, I think, between Trump and Bibi. I don't believe that Trump is a racist. I don't think Bibi is a racist, but they're pragmatists. And Trump realized that he needed some crazy people to vote for him in order to win. So he wasn't as hard on white supremacy as I think he should have been. When you're asked a question debate, would you condemn it? You don't say what? You just say, yes, I condemn that. And Bibi engineered the rehabilitation of some politicians on the far right, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's considered by many to be a racist. He's now going to be in the Knesset, and that was thanks to Bibi. Bibi engineered bringing two parties together. So his party, the Jewish Power Party, wouldn't have cleared the 3.25 5% threshold. Now they've got I think 6 seats. So world leaders look at that and they're thinking, what is Bibi doing? Why would he reach out to?
Well, Israelis look at it too. You explained that well, but I would push back. I would say that
Okay.
one of Trump's major failings, he did many things right, but one of his major failings, he didn't need those votes. And what he lost by not being crystal clear every time. Now, he would usually be like vague until he got a lot of criticism, and then he would say, of course I'm against it. No, that didn't work. And it disaffected classical Republicans, but it also disaffected moderates and independents who were like, that's weird. I don't like that. So I think he lost more votes.
No, I agree. I agree 100% with you.
But I'm just saying, by the same token, this is a crazy scenario. If Netanyahu had allowed these two little parties that are widely, I mean, almost universally described as extremist and racist here in Israel by Israelis, and we've done a story on All Israel News just this week with your good friend Nicole, and she walked through just quote after quote by the leaders of that party as well as other leaders about that party. It's pretty compelling. Now, Netanyahu could have let those two little parties he could have tried to,
they would have disappeared,
not helped them join together. So yes, okay, he picks up 6 seats, but what did he lose? Well, he's losing people like Gideon Sa'ar, who's the number 2 guy in the Likud, who says this is just one more crazy thing.
Former number 2 guy,
former number 2.
Yeah, tell us what he's doing now.
So Gideon Sa'ar was for many years the one of the closest political allies of Benjamin Netanyahu, had for a while been the second most popular figure in the Likud party, but in December broke away from Netanyahu, left the Likud party, formed his own party, the New Hope Party, and said, I will never serve with Netanyahu ever again. And then he recruited members of current Likud people and former Likud people, including Benny Begin, the son of the renowned, Likud, effective founder or leader, Menachem Begin. They all left and went with Gideon Sa'ar. And they all say, we don't disagree with Netanyahu on policy. There's too many things on the list now that we cannot work with him, and we will not work with him. Now, Gideon Sa'ar for a while in the polls looked like he was going to be at 18 to 20 seats. He came in at only 6, right? But those are 6 seats. Think about this. The religious Zionist, racist, extremist party has 6 seats.
Right.
Gideon Sa'ar has 6 seats. Gideon Sa'ar says, I will never work with you because of the 6 seats over there.
Right.
You didn't need those 6 seats of the racist extremist party. You need the Gideon Sa'ars of the world, or the Benny Begins of the world, the Danny Dayans of the world. These are names that aren't familiar so much with people outside of Israel, but here they're major players. But Bibi is such a big brand that nobody knows who they are.
So what you're saying is that
one more piece. Now you've got Naftali Bennett. Now Naftali Bennett is the head of the Yamina party, which means rightward or right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Now he came in with 7 seats, right? Now Naftali Bennett used to be the chief of staff for Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, he was his chief political and government advisor. He became so disaffected by his relationship with Netanyahu and Netanyahu's wife that he left the Likud party, formed his own party, served with Netanyahu both as education minister and as defense minister, and then Bibi fired him. Now Naftali Bennett has not said that he will never serve with Netanyahu, but Bennett said through the entire campaign, we need to fire the CEO of the country. He's doing a bad job. So what do you get? Now, Naftali Bennett briefly worked with some of the leaders who are now in this extremist party, but he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he got rid of those guys.
Right.
And now he says he'll never work with them. So that's 7 more seats that Netanyahu absolutely has to have which this extremist party makes it untenable almost.
Right.
So, all right, maybe that's too inside baseball, but that's where we.
Well,
that's
well,
where
you
we
know
are.
what's interesting is what you're saying. It's really interesting. The leader of the New Hope Party used to be one of the closest persons to Benjamin Netanyahu. The leader of the Yamina Party
I won't work with him at all.
is and now won't work with him ever again. He's sworn off. And his number two, she said, they've tried to recruit me, I won't go. And she's a fireball. I want to talk about her in a minute, because she's a very impressive person in Yifat Sasha Biton. I can never remember her name, but she rose to prominence during coronavirus because she stood up to Bibi. But so she went with Gidon Sar. And then you've got Naftali Bennett, who is a very successful businessman, a paratrooper, went into politics, super close to Bibi, now doesn't ever want to work with him again. I mean, he might, but he doesn't want to. Wants to fire the CEO. And then you've got another guy by the name of Avigdor Lieberman, who is right behind me between Bibi and Lapid. He's very right-wing nationalist, and he'll never work with Bibi again. And they were once very close, right?
Not just close. Avigdor Lieberman, and his nickname here is Yvette. He's a Russian immigrant. Lieberman was the chief of staff for Netanyahu before Naftali Bennett.
Right.
Like these people could not be closer, but they get so frustrated. Look, Netanyahu is not a disciple maker, Ron. He initially.
That's a great insight, by the way. That is a great insight. Because in ministry, I've worked with people in ministry that you are there to make them better. You're there to serve them, to make them more famous or whatever. That would be a Bibi. Then I've worked with other leaders who they'll say, Ron, all I want to do is I want to invest in you. I want you to surpass me. And I want to be like that as I disciple other leaders. Right. Bibi is more like the latter. He's not discipling you to surpass him. You are there to serve his agenda.
Yeah, and he's got a great eye for talent. I mean, he knows how to recruit. But once these guys, or men or women, get to be really impressive, he pushes them off and squashes their legislative agendas. He doesn't want them to talk in the media. He criticizes them. He belittles them. He gives them bad, cabinet positions.
Fires them.
Ignores them. It's an abrasive leadership style that has embittered, angered, frustrated so many leaders. So you talk about Lieberman. So Lieberman was a chief of staff. He was super loyal. Eventually, he gets so frustrated, he leaves, because what people realize in the Likud is if you really want a major position and you want Netanyahu's respect, you have to go form a little party and force him to deal with you not as part of his party, but as an actual coalition partner that could bolt. And so Lieberman did that. Now, Lieberman admittedly continued to work with Netanyahu once he had his own little party, Israel Betenu, Israel Our Home, which is fiercely nationalistic in terms of foreign and defense policy, but fiercely secular in its domestic policy.
Right.
But Lieberman most recently, 2 years ago, was the defense minister under Netanyahu, but got so frustrated with Netanyahu that he stepped down. This set into motion the 4 elections that we've had. And Lieberman is the first one, in my view, that started saying, I will never work with Bibi ever. Right. I don't care if I'm in the opposition forever. I'm not doing it. And now a growing number of people. Now Lapid, centrist, as you said, Lapid has some policy disagreements with Netanyahu, but he served as his finance minister until Bibi fired him. And Bibi, and so now Lapid says, I will never work with him. And so Benny Gantz was.
That's where I wanted to go to next.
Right. He's currently the defense minister. He is the head of the Blue and White Party. He has only 8 seats now, but he had run against Netanyahu in 3 elections as the leader of the opposition. But last March, Benny Gantz said, we're in a coronavirus crisis. The nation needs leadership. We can't have elections forever. I told everybody that I was not going to serve with Bibi ever, but for the sake of the country, I'm going to break my pledge and form a national unity government with Netanyahu. Now, the reason this is important, if you've got time.
I've got plenty of time. I'm worried about you.
No. So Gantz did something quite dramatic. Now, if you agreed with him, you saw him as a hero, willing to put his ego, his own political fortunes underneath the needs of the country. Now, if you didn't want him to help Netanyahu, then people called him a traitor. He's a Judas.
And let's be real clear about one thing. And this is where you might think he was a traitor, is that he was promised to rotate prime ministership with Bibi. So after 18 months, he would become prime minister. Now, most Israelis say that he was the only one in the country who actually believed that he would ever be prime minister, because nobody else did. I certainly didn't, and I'm going to guess that you didn't.
Well, I didn't, but I will say this, that the worst thing to be called in Israel is not a coward or a leftist or an Arab, or the worst thing to be called here in Israel is a friar.
Right.
And that means like a sucker. Like you paid $50 for that thing and it's worth 10, or whatever. It's you got suckered. And so people accuse Benny Gantz of being a sucker. Now, what's interesting here is that Gantz made this deal, and he said he did it for the good of the country, and everybody could see the country didn't want to go to a 4th round of elections. So and Gantz got written into the actual fundamental, what's called the Basic Law of Israel, that on November 17th, 2021, if there's not another hard, clear elected government, he becomes the prime minister no matter what. Now, people called him a friar, people called him a traitor, but what happened? He has become the poster child. Benny Gantz has become the poster child of what happens if you try to help Netanyahu.
Right.
What happens? And so what did happen? The only loophole in the agreement between Netanyahu and Benny Gantz was that if no budget was passed in 2020, no government budget was passed, that would automatically trigger new elections. Well, to most people, again, if you if you thought, well, Bibi will use that, or he'll find something else. But many people did think, well, there has to be at least a budget. Maybe Bibi will find something else, but you can't not have a budget in the midst of the worst economic crisis in the history of the country, at least since the mid-'80s, when there was hyperinflation. Netanyahu refused to make a budget. Why did he refuse?
Well, he suggested a 1-year budget.
Right, he knew but the coalition agreement was for a 2-year budget, and the entire coalition agreement was said, let's pass a budget that goes for 2 years. Then we won't argue about budgets. We'll focus on dealing with Corona. It was actually the right thing to do, and I've gotten to know Gantz, and I've covered him, and I've interviewed him a number of times. I've had some private meetings with him, and again, I don't have a horse in this race, but I think he did the right thing, the noble thing. Because everything that's in that agreement was for the good of the country. Now, I am critical of Netanyahu on a number of areas, but this one is, I consider him innocent until proven guilty on the corruption charges.
Right.
But the idea of not having a budget for a country in a crisis, that just doesn't work for me. But that was the loophole that he used so that Benny Gantz wouldn't become the prime minister. Now, last point on that. What you have now is this when I say Benny Gantz has become the poster child for, if you try to help Netanyahu, he will knife you. That's the feeling, right? and that's why we have the lead story on All Israel News right now, that looks at all the final numbers, what party got what, and where is the party on? Are they on the sort of center right side of the spectrum or the left? And then we have an interview with that I did with a very prominent Likud member. She is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahum. Fascinating woman. But she's making this call through All Israel News to the nation, to all these 97 members of the center right, saying, listen, we all have our disagreements on things, but let's come together and let's work together for the good of the country. And I said to her in the interview, listen, I hear what you're saying, but wasn't that the argument last time?
Right.
And people look at that and go, but Netanyahu didn't keep his end of the bargain. And so this is where it's not, you got foreign policy issues and national security issues, and you have domestic issues, but then you have leadership issues. And I would say that Netanyahu's number one problem beyond anything else is that people who he needs to form a coalition do not trust him, and they do not want to work with him. And his pathway is narrowing, and 4 times in a row. I mean, how many times more?
Yeah,
I don't know. Where do you go from here?
Yeah, he's not going to get more popular. That's highly unlikely. And now what you have, so you have Gidon Sa, who, again, just to remind everybody, and let me just reset things and turn off my phone here. So I'm with Joel Rosenberg, who is a Israeli from America like me. He is the leader, editor-in-chief of All Israel News. .com, allisrael.com, also allarab.com, a sister site. So we encourage you to go there, check it out, sign up for their newsletter. And he knows a lot of the players in Israel. He's interviewed a lot of them. He used to work for Benjamin Netanyahu briefly. And we like Joel. If you know Joel, he's a prolific writer. He's written several novels that are very compelling political thrillers about the Middle East. And so we're really excited to have you here, Joel. Okay. You've got, so Gidon Sar, he's right now, I'm sure there are people right now, his old buddies in Likud are right now saying, come on, Gidon, come on back with us. Well, he's looking at Benny Gantz. He's like, no way. I know my fate. If I come back. Then you've got Benny Gantz, obviously isn't going to fall for that trick again. He's not going to give his 8 seats to Bibi. Then you've got Lieberman, who is a pretty strong-willed Russian immigrant. I don't think he's going to ever serve with Bibi again. I think he has, that's the hill he's going to die on. That just leaves Yamina, who may or may not serve with Bibi, but even then, it's not enough. He's only at 59 seats.
Ron, let's point out one thing. I know we're running out of time, but so in the final weeks, final days, the final last week of the campaign, where Yamina with Naftali Bennett was at 10, 11, 12 seats, Bibi Netanyahu and the Likud party came after him and savaged him, and they were very successful.
Right.
How? Because they dropped him from about 12 seats to 7. Okay, but Bibi needs, but now now Naftali Bennett, the one person, let's be clear, the one person who says, look, I really think we should fire Netanyahu, but I'm willing but now he only has 7 seats. It's not enough. So Netanyahu has played footsie with an extremist party, and in doing so, and attacked his one possible rival.
Right.
And it is created, and he's playing, these are gimmicks. Let's just be honest. These are political gimmicks designed to try to eke out 1 or 2 more seats to give him what he wants. But it ends up costing him more. And the truth is, I mean, and again, I'm not advocating, if Netanyahu can put together a government, his strengths are so strong that, we'll report it, and we're not taking a position. But I'm just saying, if you listen to every other leader who said, I'm not going to work with them, they all say, but I'll work with Likud as long as Netanyahu isn't
okay,
there.
so that's where I want to go now. In the time we have left, is there any possibility that Bibi just walks away? that he says, I understand that I am the polarizing figure here, even though I believe I'm the best prime minister Israel's ever had, longest serving. Here are my accomplishments. Nobody wants to work with me. And even in Likud now, if you look at and this is just my opinion, but the top people who've risen to the top of Likud, they're not the most talented. They're not the most, they're hacks for Bibi, many of them. They will do whatever he wants. So the really smart ones have less. Now you go down the list, and the first guy who is really respectable would be Nir Barkat, the very popular.
Yeah, and I would. That's exactly what I was going to say, Ron. And there's no way you could call him a hack. I mean, this guy ran Jerusalem, brilliant. He's kept pretty quiet.
Right, but he's number 7. You know, he should be number 2, in my opinion. And I think he's the one guy that if things fell apart for Bibi and he resigned and Nir Barkat became the leader of Likud, I think he would be a great prime minister.
I think you're right. But the reason he's not is partly because there's a primary process and you have to be voted.
Right.
And he hadn't, you know, he's been spending his time as the mayor of Jerusalem for many, many years, doing an incredibly good job.
Right.
And hadn't built up quite as political, you know, grassroots campaign. But the other side is for him, you know, I see him being very quiet in the middle of the night press conference campaign rally that Netanyahu had that night, Tuesday, declaring victory, even though there wasn't. I noticed that Nir Barkat was at the absolute far end of the stage.
Right.
I think he's keeping his distance. I may be wrong. I'd like to talk to him about it. I don't know if he's ready to talk about it. But I think he's actually keeping his head down, because if you're number 2 or 3, you are tied in to Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm.
But there is coming a post-Netanyahu era. Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, the former deputy foreign minister for Israel, who happens to sit on our All Israel News advisory board.
Right. And married to a believer, if I'm not mistaken.
From Ohio. Ann Ayalon is a lovely woman, and so Ambassador Ayalon and I wrote a piece for Newsweek this past Sunday, and we said, are Israelis preparing for a post-Netanyahu era? And that is the question, because Netanyahu's number one political advantage right now, Ron, is that there is no one figure who is the obvious unifying figure to bring all of the anti-Netanyahu forces together. There are 2 real prospects. One is Yair Lapid, because he has 17 seats. Right. That's larger than every other anti-Netanyahu party. Okay, so that's one. However, you have people on the right who say he's not right enough, he's too centrist, so they don't want to work with him. Benny Gantz is the other guy, and even though Benny Gantz, you know, considered a friar or a traitor by some, everyone thought Benny Gantz wasn't even going to be elected.
Right. I did not. I thought he wouldn't get any seats. He got 8.
We have seen, I know Easter's not a big thing here for Jews, but we've seen a political resurrection. Gantz went from maybe not being in the Knesset at all to having 8 seats, which makes him the 4th largest faction in the Knesset.
Okay, so, let me just explain something real quick for our viewers. So we shared this earlier, but I want to be real clear. How do you get no seats? It's real simple. In the Knesset, if you don't get at least 4 seats, you get 0 seats. So if Gantz had gotten 3 seats, or percentage-wise 3.9 seats, that means he gets 0. So he would have gotten votes, but he may not have broken what we call the threshold in order to actually enter the Knesset. Now, he surprised everyone because he really lost a lot of credibility by going with Netanyahu. He surprised all of us. A lot of people still really like him and honor him. So he came out with 8 seats, double than what he expected.
Yeah,
what we expected.
Absolutely. And how did he do it? First of all, he did apologize. He apologized to his party. He apologized to his country, and he apologized to his previous compatriot there, Yair Lapid.
Yair Lapid.
He said, listen, I did this for the right reasons, but you guys were right. Netanyahu stabbed me in the back, and so I tried, but I've learned my lesson, and now I know better, and we've shown. That's the other point he made. It's not just, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. He said, we now have exposed, from his perspective, that Netanyahu, you can't do it. So we tried, and it was almost like he didn't use this analogy, but it's almost like Ariel Sharon giving back Gaza for nothing to the Palestinians and saying, and Netanyahu was opposed to that at the time. I was opposed to it because I said it's going to create a Hamastan. You're going to have a terrorist state in Gaza. But Ariel Sharon, one, wanted to get out of Gaza, and two, he wanted to expose that even if you give land, you won't get peace. You're going to get rockets and terror, but we'll handle it. And in a sense, even though I don't think that was Benny Gantz's intention, he has exposed this weakest part of Netanyahu's leadership style, which is make a deal with him, he's not going to keep it. So we have to wrap, I know, but let's just say this. There is a scenario, or there's a rumor buzzing here in Israel. I did a story on it yesterday. It's still on the site, All Israel News, which is, even though Lapid has the most seats of the anti-Netanyahu camp, 17, and Gantz only has 8, could Gantz be the consensus candidate, the one that everybody says, well, I don't know if he should be the prime minister, but maybe he's the only one that we can all back to make him the prime minister? And that's where you finally get into a question we don't have time to get into, but where will the Arab parties factor in? Historically, they've wanted nothing to do with the government. They've just been the opposition. But Israeli Arabs are increasingly angry at their parties because they're like, you guys have, in the last election, last seats, they had 15 seats. They were the second largest or third largest faction, but you guys never play ball. Therefore, you never get money for our Arab communities. You never get more crime prevention in our city. Like, you're not doing anything.
Right.
And there's been a lot of angst and anger inside the Arab Israeli communities. And so the question now is, and there's an active conversation, will any of the Arab leaders say, you know what, let's help somebody become prime minister? Now, the last point I'll make, and then of course it's your program, so I'll let give you the last word. But I do have to go here as Shabbat approaches. The guy to keep your eye on is somebody we wrote. I wrote a piece in January for All Israel News called "The 21 Israelis to Keep an Eye On in 2021," and it was all across the board, from music to to movies and TV and politics and business and so forth, culture, sports. Well, Mansour Abbas is on the list. Who's Mansour Abbas? He's not Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is the president of the Palestinian Authority. Mansour Abbas is an Israeli Arab who runs a little tiny party called Ra'am. Ra'am is an Islamist party. It literally is the Israeli equivalent of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
Now, Ra'am has 4 seats. Bibi Netanyahu needs 2. And there's been all this talk, should Netanyahu just invite Mansour Abbas and his party to join? Then you've got 62 or 63 or whatever, and you're good. But in this interview I did with this Likud person, the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, I said, what's your reaction? What is the reaction inside Likud for a right-wing government to bring in the Muslim Brotherhood? She says, I'm not comfortable with it. There is no consensus. I don't see it. But the question then becomes, well, what about Gantz? What about if you're trying to remove Netanyahu from power and you need 4 seats, do you ask Mansour Abbas?
So
just I'll leave you with the final point, but we got to go.
Just a little bit of context regarding the Arab parties. So you had mentioned earlier there's a party called the Joint List. The Joint List was 3 parties. So these 3 parties would join together because that way, the more
Islamist, just to be clear.
What's that?
They're Arabs. They're Arab parties, but they're also a communist party, a Marxist party, and an Islamist Muslim Brotherhood party. I don't think so.
Right, but they're the only parties that the Arabs. They're the only parties that the Arabs have. Yeah. So not everybody who votes for them is necessarily an Islamist or a communist. They just don't want to vote for a Jewish party. So these 3 parties, they joined together and they were pretty formidable. They got 15 seats in the last election. But like you said, I think a lot of Arabs are looking at the Abraham Accords, and they're seeing Arabs outside of Israel making peace with Israel and benefiting from it. And they're saying, why don't we do that? The mayor of Nazareth is starting to say, I want to work with Israel.
Right.
At Nazareth being
But
an Arab
every
city.
single member of the joint list voted against ratifying the Abraham Accords, and people are like, "You've got to be kidding me!" And oh my gosh!
So the Arab people of Israel, the Israeli Arabs, are saying, no, we want, because like you and me both know that we meet Arabs every day in Israel and we get along. We don't get in, we do commerce with them, and I can have a very polite conversation with Arabs in Israel. And do they have an Israeli flag at home? Probably not, but we get along. And so what Ram did, even though they're the Muslim Brotherhood of Israel, they heard their constituents and they said, we're going to break away from the joint list because we want to be in a government. If it's a right-wing government, a left-wing government, we want to be part of it finally. And I believe, and then what happened on election night was pretty dramatic because all the reports were that they fell below the 4-seat threshold, and it backfired. Turns out it didn't backfire. They ended up getting 4 seats, and now they're saying, "Hey, we're listening."
Make an offer we can't refuse.
Right, exactly. Now it becomes a weird thing where you have this far right extremist 6-seat party, religious Zionists. They're not going to work with Ram. We don't even know if the Likud will work with Ram. We don't even know if the centrist parties will work with them. But I do know this. I believe this, that their voters, let's say their voters represent a third of the Arab vote. They're not hardcore Islamists. They're not terrorists. Because for the most part, Israeli Arabs are not terrorists. They don't. If they did, we'd have buses and things blowing up every day. We've learned to get along, and but they want representation. So now it's interesting. And I know you've got to go because Shabbat is coming in, and in Israel, I want our viewers to understand that there's something very special that happens every Friday night in Israel that I've not seen duplicated in any other country. The entire country, even in secularist Tel Aviv, shuts down. Families come together. They have a meal together. Tell me just real briefly, Joel, what does Shabbat Friday night mean to you?
Yeah. And so as Jewish believers in Jesus, as evangelicals, so we just love how the country quiets down. And we have 4 sons. 2 of them have served in the Israeli army, and when they've been in the army, they unless they're closing base and guarding the base for the night or the weekend, they come home and they do their laundry, but we're together and we invite over family and friends, and it's just my wife makes this amazing meal every week, and we we light candles and we say prayers and we are together, and remembering all the mercies that God has had on us. And for us, like you, Ron, that to be Jewish people who love Jesus, to make Aliyah, to be here, to have your kids in the army, to pay your taxes, I'm terrible at my Hebrew, so the boys have learned it beautifully, and Lynn has done much better than me too. But to buy a home, become part of the society, try to be a blessing, to just have a chance to stop and be together is a very sweet thing. And so we don't take it that, okay, if we don't, sit down and light the candles at the exact right moment, we're not ultra orthodox about it, but it's important to us. Now, in this case, our soldier, our son who just finished the special forces here in Israel yesterday, today he's flying out to the United States, sort of take a month to just catch his breath before he finds a job. And so tonight we're not doing our usual thing. Tonight we're taking him out to an early dinner. Restaurants are beginning to open again, and we're taking him to the airport to give him a hug and wish him well on a much deserved month off. But that's life here.
Congratulations on that. That's another thing that folks, when you live in Israel and your kids, I've had 3 girls go through the army, they come home Friday after Thursday night. They're just so tired. They sleep literally from the time they get home until Shabbat dinner, the next day. And you're so proud of them. They come home in their army fatigues. And they're not hardcore warmongers. They're just kids who, like everyone else, have to
Bring your
go in the
service,
army.
bring your faithful service to God and to country. Yeah.
Joel, thank you so much for being with us. I hope this is the first of many times that we can come together and have a discussion about Israeli life, Israeli politics. I think it's been very insightful for our viewers, and we wish you all the best. Have a Shabbat Shalom and Pesach Sameach, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you, Ron. Great to be with you. And again, blessings to you and your family on Shabbat, and as you celebrate this great mercy that God has given us in Passover, and we have battled the plague this year, and it's beginning to pass over our home. Not the political plague, but the of multiple, never-ending elections. But Corona seems to be moving into our rear view window, and but I don't want to move back to normal. I want God to create a new normal. But we'll take it one day.
That's another conversation, and I think he is creating that. Just you and I being able to do this via Zoom versus being in a studio is a wonderful part of our new normal. And another thing we need to talk about, we don't have time today, is could there be a fifth election? And there very well could be in the next 6 months, another election.
That's
so
a depressing way to end, but yes, yes, absolutely. They're most likely, but we'll see. We'll see.
All right. God bless you all. God bless Lynn and your boys, and we will see you very soon.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who is watching.
All right. Shabbat Shalom to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you as well very soon. God bless. I'm Ron Cantor for God TV, and we will see you soon. Bye.